My name is Gerald Thomas Whitfield. I am 65 years old. I have a bad heart, not just emotionally, but literally. 2 stents, a cardiologist who calls me every 3 months, a small orange pill bottle I carry everywhere I go. And on the morning of November 23rd, Thanksgiving Day, I was standing in my own kitchen, wearing my old wool sweater, the one my wife Margaret bought me 16 years ago before she passed, and I was stirring a pot of sweet potato soup. I had woken up at 5 in the morning to cook. The turkey was already in the oven, the cornbread was cooling on the counter, the green beans were simmering. I had spent $42, almost a quarter of what I had left in my wallet, on groceries the day before, because I wanted everything to be perfect. I wanted Jessica to be happy. Jessica, my daughter, my only child. I had raised her alone after her mother died. Worked double shifts at the hardware store for 11 years. Skipped my own meals so she could eat. Sat beside her bed when she had fever. Learned how to braid hair from a YouTube video because I refused to let my little girl go to school looking unloved. I had done everything for that girl. And that morning, while the turkey browned and the soup stirred and the whole house smelled like Thanksgiving, Jessica came downstairs in her robe, looked around the kitchen, and said something I will never forget for as long as I live. She said, "Dad, we need to talk." And the way she said it, cold, flat, rehearsed, I felt something shift in my chest. Not my heart condition, something else, something deeper. I turned off the stove. I said, "Okay, baby, what's wrong?" She didn't look at me. She looked at the counter, and then she slid a duffel bag across the kitchen floor toward my feet. Inside the bag, I would discover moments later, were my clothes, my toiletries, my pill bottles, my Bible, my photograph of Margaret, everything I owned, packed, neatly folded. And on top of the bag, she placed an envelope. "There's $400 in there," she said. "It should be enough to get you started somewhere." I stared at that bag for a very long time. Then I looked up at my daughter, this woman I had carried on my shoulders, this woman I had built my entire life around, and I said the only thing I could manage. I said, "Jessica, it's Thanksgiving." She nodded, like she already knew, like she had already made peace with it. "I know, Dad," she said. "That's actually why I wanted to do this today. Marcus and I have been planning this for weeks. We need your room for his home office. His business is expanding, and he needs the space. We've already ordered the furniture. It arrives Monday. Marcus, her husband, a man who had never once looked me in the eye during dinner." I didn't cry. I didn't raise my voice. I just stood there in my wool sweater, in the kitchen where I had just spent 5 hours cooking Thanksgiving dinner for a family that had already decided I was no longer welcome. I picked up the duffel bag, I picked up the envelope, and I walked out the front door, before the bag, before the door. Let me tell you who I was before that morning. Because I think it matters. I think you need to know. I grew up in a small town in Ohio. My father was a carpenter. My mother cleaned houses. We didn't have much, but we had something that money can't manufacture. We had dignity. We had respect for one another. We said good morning. We said thank you. We sat at the dinner table together every single night. I married Margaret when I was 27. She was the most beautiful woman I had ever seen, not because of how she looked, though she was lovely, but because of how she listened. She listened to everything. She made you feel like the most important person in the room. We had Jessica 3 years after we got married. And then, when Jessica was 9 years old, Margaret got sick, ovarian cancer, stage 3. I won't go into the details of those 2 years. Some pain is too private for words, but I will say this, I never left her side, not once. I took FMLA leave from work. I sat in hospital chairs that left marks on my back for weeks. I held her hand through every treatment, every bad night, every moment when the hope got smaller and smaller until it was just a tiny flame in a very dark room. Margaret passed on a Tuesday morning in October with Jessica and me on either side of her. Jessica was 11. After that, it was just the two of us. I worked, I cooked, I helped with homework, I attended parent-teacher conferences, I saved up for her prom dress, I signed her student loan when she went to college for business administration. I sold my truck, the one I had driven for 12 years, to help cover her first semester's housing costs when the financial aid fell short. I never complained, not once, because she was all I had left of Margaret. She was my reason. When she graduated, I was the man crying in the third row with a handmade banner that said, "I'm so proud of you, Jessica." I made it myself. With cardboard and a marker, she laughed when she saw it. She hugged me and said, "Oh, Dad." I thought that meant she was proud of me too. I thought we were okay. Part 3. Marcus, the man who changed everything. She met Marcus Calloway at 26. He worked in real estate development, drove a BMW, wore shirts that were always perfectly pressed. The first time she brought him home for dinner, he sat at my table and talked about himself for 45 minutes straight. He talked about his deals, his clients, his vision, his ambitions. He never once asked me a question. Not one. When he left that night, I said to Jessica very gently, "He seems confident." She said, "He's successful, Dad. You just don't understand that world." I let it go, because she was happy, and her happiness mattered more than my opinion of the man sitting across from me. They got married 2 years later, a big wedding, beautiful venue. I wore my best suit, the same one I had worn to Margaret's funeral, let out slightly because I had put on some weight. When I mentioned to Jessica that I didn't have money for a new suit, she said Marcus would handle it. Marcus did not handle it. I wore the funeral suit. After the wedding, they bought a house together. A big one, 4 bedrooms, in a nice suburb. And 6 months later, when my lease ran out on my apartment and my Social Security check wasn't enough to cover a new one in the current market, Jessica offered her words, "You can stay with us for a while, Dad, just until you get back on your feet." I moved into their guest room. That was 14 months before Thanksgiving. 14 months I lived in that house. I cooked, I cleaned, I watched the dog when they went on vacation. I waited up when they came home late because old habits from parenting never fully die. I tried to stay out of the way. I ate early so I wouldn't be in the kitchen when Marcus wanted to cook. I kept my door closed. I turned my television volume low. But somehow I was always too much. Marcus started making comments, small ones at first, things like, "Gerald, did you use my coffee this morning?" Or, "Gerald, I had clients coming and I needed the living room cleared." Always formal, always my full name. Never Dad, never even Gerald with any warmth. Jessica stopped defending me around month 4. By month 8, she was making the same comments. "Dad, Marcus needs quiet in the mornings." And, "Dad, we're trying to run a household." And the worst one, "Dad, I love you, but this is our home, our home." Like I hadn't given her a home for 23 years. Like I hadn't built her entire foundation from the ground up with my own 2 hands and 2 jobs and a broken back. I stayed silent. I always stayed silent because I am from a generation that believed in respect, that believed in keeping peace, that believed that if you loved someone, you didn't weaponize your past sacrifices against them. You just kept loving. You kept being present. You trusted that they would eventually see you clearly. I was wrong. The bag, the money, the door. Let me take you back to that morning, because I want you to understand everything. I woke up at 5. My back ached. It always does. I took my heart medication with a glass of water and stood in the kitchen in the dark for a moment, just breathing, just being grateful that I woke up at all. Then I started cooking. The turkey, the soup, the cornbread, the green beans. I even made a sweet potato pie because it was Jessica's favorite, and I remembered how, when she was little, She would press her face against the oven glass and watch it bake. I set the table myself, nice napkins, the good plates, the ones Jessica's aunt had given them as a wedding gift that Marcus said were too formal for everyday use. I thought, today is special. Today we give thanks. I was giving thanks, alone in that kitchen, for my daughter, for the roof over my head, for one more Thanksgiving, and then she came downstairs, and then there was the bag. After she told me about the home office, about Marcus's expanding business, about the furniture arriving Monday, she added one more thing. She said it, looking at the wall, not at me. She said, I've already called a shelter, sent Augustine's on Maple. They have space. The 400 should help you with a deposit somewhere, eventually. A shelter. My daughter had called a shelter for me. I stood very still. I looked at the bag on the floor. I looked at the turkey in the oven. I looked at the table I had set. I looked at my daughter, this woman I had raised with everything I had, and I thought of Margaret. I thought, what would she say right now? I picked up the bag. I picked up the envelope. I did not raise my voice. I did not cry. I did not remind Jessica of the truck I sold, or the loans I co-signed, or the nights I sat alone after she went to college because the house felt too quiet without her. I just said, okay, baby, I love you. She didn't say it back. I walked out the front door at 7:18 in the morning on Thanksgiving Day, and I stood on the sidewalk in my wool sweater with a duffel bag and $400 and a heart that was broken in more ways than my cardiologist could measure. Where the lost people go. I walked for a long time. I didn't know where I was going. I just walked. The streets were quiet, Thanksgiving quiet. That particular stillness of a holiday morning when everyone else is indoors, and the world belongs briefly to the people who have nowhere to be. I found a park about 1.5 miles from Jessica's house, Riverside Commons. I had walked through it before, in the mornings when I couldn't sleep. It had a long path along a small creek, a few benches, some old oak trees that dropped their leaves in slow, spiraling circles. I sat down on a bench near the water. I opened the envelope and counted the money. $400 exactly. 20s, crisp ones, like she'd gotten them from an ATM recently, like she'd planned this days ago. I put the money back. I folded my hands. I watched the creek move. I stayed there for a very long time. Around 10 in the morning, I heard footsteps on the gravel path, slow, deliberate steps, the tapping of a cane. I looked up. An old man was walking toward me. He was tall, or had been once, now slightly bent, but still with something in his posture that suggested he had stood very straight for most of his life. He wore a good wool coat, a scarf, a proper hat, the kind men of a certain generation wore without irony. He looked at my bench. He looked at me. He looked at the duffel bag at my feet. And then, without asking, he sat down beside me. We sat in silence for a while, two old men by a creek, the leaves falling, the world quiet. Finally he spoke. He said, "Long night." I almost laughed. "Long morning." I said. He nodded, looked at the water. "I come here every Thanksgiving," he said. "Have for 31 years since my wife died." I turned to look at him. "Mine too." I said, "My wife, I mean. She's been gone 14 years. He nodded slowly, like that number meant something to him, like he understood the weight of it. "I'm Walter," he said. He didn't offer his last name, just Walter, Gerald. I said. We shook hands. His grip was firm, precise, the kind of handshake that remembers when handshakes meant something. "What's in the bag, Gerald?" he asked, not nosily, gently. I paused. And then, I don't know why. Maybe because he was a stranger. Maybe because strangers are sometimes easier to be honest with than family. I told him. I told him everything. The man on the bench, Walter, listened. He didn't interrupt. He didn't offer advice or commentary. He just listened, the way Margaret used to listen, with his whole attention. his eyes on the water, his hands folded on his cane. When I finished, he was quiet for a moment. Then he said, "How's your heart?" I blinked. "I'm sorry. You mentioned a heart condition. How is it managed?" I said, "As long as I have my medication." "Do you have it with you?" Yes," I said. I patted the side of the bag. He nodded. Then he said, "I have a proposition for you, Gerald, and I want you to hear it completely before you say anything." I looked at him. This old man in his good wool coat, this stranger on a park bench on Thanksgiving morning. "I'm listening," I said. "I am 80 years old," he began. "I have more money than I will ever spend. I have a home with 12 rooms, and only 4 of them are in use. I have a housekeeper who comes twice a week and a driver who comes every day, and I still eat dinner alone every single night at a table built for 10. He paused. "What I am asking is simple. I would like a companion, someone to share the house, to talk over breakfast, to sit with in the evenings, to simply be present. In exchange." He turned and looked at me directly for the first time. "I will take care of everything, the room, the food, the medical needs, and when I am gone." He reached into his coat pocket and placed a business card on the bench between us. I picked it up. Hargrove Holdings, LLC. Walter J. Hargrove, Chairman. I stared at that card for a very long time. The shocking twist, Walter J. Hargrove. Now here is where I must pause and tell you something. Because I didn't know, sitting on that bench, holding that card, what that name meant. I didn't know who Walter J. Hargrove was. I didn't follow business news. I didn't read the financial pages. But that afternoon, after Walter had invited me for Thanksgiving dinner at his home, a home I was not prepared for, not in any way, his assistant, a kind young woman named Priya, quietly pulled up a news article on her tablet and placed it in front of me. "Mr. Whitfield," she said softly, "I thought you might want to know a little about the man you'll be living with." The headline read, "Walter Hargrove, reclusive real estate billionaire, turns 80. Empire valued at $240 million. I read the article slowly, 3 times, because I needed to make sure I was reading it correctly. Walter J. Hargrove, born in poverty in rural Georgia, built his first property deal with a borrowed $5,000 at age 22. Grew Hargrove Holdings over 58 years into one of the largest privately held real estate portfolios in the Mid-Atlantic region. $240 million in property assets, office buildings, residential developments, commercial centers, historical properties. He had been profiled in Forbes. He had donated millions to cardiac research of all things, in memory of his wife, Eleanor, who had died of a heart attack 31 years ago. The same Eleanor whose name was on the bench where we had met. I turned and looked at Walter across the dinner table. He was quietly cutting his turkey. He looked up and caught my expression. "Priya showed you?" he asked. "Yes," I said. He nodded, put down his fork. "I should tell you, the proposition stands regardless of what you just read. I'm not offering you charity, Gerald. I'm offering you company. There's a difference." "Why me?" I asked. "You don't know me. You met me 2 hours ago on a park bench." He picked his fork back up, chewed thoughtfully, then said, "Because you walked out of your daughter's house with a duffel bag and $400, and you sat by the creek, and you didn't cry. You didn't call anyone. You didn't fall apart. You just sat there, quietly." He looked at me. "Men who can sit quietly with their pain are men who know how to live with other people. That's rare, Gerald. That's rarer than money." I didn't know what to say, so I just said, "Thank you for the dinner, Walter." He almost smiled. "Eat more cornbread," he said. "Priya made it from scratch. 12 rooms and quiet mornings. I moved in the following weekend. Walter's home was a thing of understated elegance. Not showy, not the kind of wealth that screams, the kind that simply exists. Heavy wood furniture, high ceilings, a library with actual books, all read, all spined and worn, a kitchen with a window that looked out onto a garden. He gave me a room on the second floor, large with its own bathroom and a window that faced east, which meant I woke to sunlight every morning. There was a writing desk, an armchair, a television I rarely used. I put Margaret's photograph on the writing desk. Walter saw it one morning. I had left my door open, and he stopped in the hallway. "Your wife?" he asked. "Yes," I said. "Margaret. She died 14 years ago." He looked at the photograph for a long moment. "She looks kind," he said. "She was," I said, "the kindest person I ever knew." He nodded and moved on down the hallway. But that evening at dinner, he placed a framed photograph of his own Eleanor on the sideboard in the dining room. "She should have company, too," he said simply, and that was the kind of man Walter Hargrove was. We settled into a rhythm. Breakfast at 8. A walk in the garden, if the weather permitted, he with his cane, me with my slowly improving back. Lunch was light. Afternoons he spent in his study going over reports from Priya and the small team that still managed his holdings. Evenings we sat in the library. Sometimes we talked. Sometimes we read. Sometimes we just sat. Two old men with the particular comfort of shared silence. He told me about Eleanor, about building his first deal, about a mistake he made in 1987 that nearly cost him everything, about how he recovered, about how money had never been the point. The building had been the point, the creating of something permanent. I told him about Margaret, about the hardware store, about Jessica's high school graduation, about the cardboard banner I made with a marker. He listened to all of it. One evening in December, about 3 weeks after I moved in, he said, "Gerald, I've spoken with my attorney." I looked up from my book. "I've had my will revised," he said. He said it matter-of-factly, the way he said most things. "I want you to know, not to influence anything between us. Our arrangement would be what it is regardless. But you deserve to know." "Walter," I started. "Let me finish," he said quietly. "I have distant relatives, cousins I haven't spoken to in decades, charities that already received their allocations, and now—" He paused. "A friend, a real one, the kind that sat quietly on a park bench with his whole life in a duffel bag, and still said 'I love you' on the way out the door." My chest tightened. "You heard that?" I asked. "I was on the path," he said, coming toward the bench. "I heard you on the phone with her, leaving a voicemail, telling her you loved her and to enjoy Thanksgiving dinner." I had forgotten I'd done that. I had called Jessica's phone. She hadn't picked up, so I left a message. I told her I was okay. I told her I loved her. I told her to enjoy the food. "That's why I sat down," Walter said. "Any man who can do that deserves someone in his corner." He picked up his book. "The attorney's name is Bernard Klein. You'll meet him next week. The estate is valued at $240 million. Various assets, broken into provisions. You'll understand the details when Bernard explains them." I sat very still for a very long time. Then I said, "Walter, I can't accept. Gerald." His voice was firm but gentle. "I am 80 years old. I have no children. Eleanor and I tried, and it simply wasn't meant to be. I have more than I could ever spend, and no one worthy to leave it to." He looked at me over his reading glasses. "Let an old man do something that feels right. Don't take that from me." I looked at Margaret's photograph on my desk. I thought about what she would say. I thought she would say, "Gerald Thomas Whitfield, let the man be generous." So I nodded, and I didn't say another word about it. Jessica finds out. It was early February when Jessica called me for the first time. I had called her twice in December, once on her birthday, once on Christmas. She had answered on Christmas, briefly, said she was busy with Marcus's family visiting. She did not ask where I was. She did not ask how I was managing. But in February she called me. I was in the garden when my phone rang. Her name on the screen. I stared at it for a moment, feeling something old and complicated move through me. I answered, Hello, Jessica, Dad. Her voice was careful. Dad, where are you? I'm well, I said. Thank you for asking. Dad, I'm serious. Someone told Marcus that you're living in some big house in the Ridgemont area, with a man named Walter Hargrove. Ah. So word had gotten around. Yes, I said. I'm living with a friend. A friend. A pause. Dad, Walter Hargrove is one of the wealthiest men in this region. How do you even know him? I met him in the park, I said, on Thanksgiving. Silence. Dad, what is going on? Nothing is going on, Jessica. I'm living comfortably. My health is good. I have my medication and good meals, and I'm sleeping well. But why is he? She stopped herself. Regrouped. Dad, are you okay? Are you being taken advantage of? Because if someone is, I am perfectly fine, I said gently. Don't worry about me. Can I come see you? I paused. I think that might be premature. I said, Dad, I love you, Jessica. Take care of yourself. I hung up. I stood in Walter's garden in the February cold, looking at the bare rose bushes that Priya had told me would bloom spectacularly in April. And I felt something settle inside me, not bitterness, not revenge, something quieter than either of those things. Clarity, spring and the truth. Spring came. The roses bloomed. Walter was right, spectacular. My heart was checked in March. My cardiologist was pleased. Whatever you're doing, she said, keep doing it. Your stress indicators are significantly improved. I had stopped being afraid, I think. That was what had changed. I had spent 14 months in Jessica's house walking on eggshells, turning my volume down, eating early, staying out of the way of my own life. And now I had space, quiet, dignity, a man across the breakfast table who looked me in the eye when he spoke to me. Walter and I took a trip to Virginia in April. He had a property there he wanted to walk one more time, an old estate he'd bought in the 80s and was now considering donating to a historical preservation society. We drove down together, Priya at the wheel, the two of us in the back, talking about the Blue Ridge Mountains, and whether Eleanor would have liked the view. She would have, Walter said. She liked anything with trees. Margaret too, I said. We looked out our respective windows in silence, each of us with our respective grief, and somehow that was the most companionable hour I could remember in years. It was in May that Walter had his episode. He collapsed in the library one evening, not dramatically, not with a cry. He simply wasn't there when I walked in, and then I looked down and he was on the floor, conscious but confused, his face pale, his breathing shallow. I called 911. I held his hand. I rode with him in the ambulance. At the hospital, a young doctor came out and said, "Are you family?" I said, "I'm his closest friend." She hesitated. "He's asking for Gerald," she said. "That's me." I said. She let me in. Walter stayed in the hospital for 6 days. I was there every day. I brought his reading glasses because he hated the hospital ones. I read to him from a history book he was halfway through. I talked to his doctors and relayed information to Priya and Bernard, who managed everything else. On the 4th day, he looked at me and said, "You're still here." "Of course," I said. "Most people," he said slowly, "show up when there's money on the table. You show up when there's nothing in it for you." "There's everything in it for me," I said. "You're my friend, Walter." He was quiet. Then, "Gerald, my will. Bernard has the documents. Don't talk about that right now." "I want to," he said firmly. His voice was weak, but his eyes were clear. "I have thought about this carefully. I am leaving you 30% of the Hargrove estate. That is approximately $72 million in property assets. The remainder goes to Eleanor's Cardiac Research Foundation and to 2 housing charities in Georgia." He paused. "You will also have full right of residence in the house for the rest of your life, regardless." I sat with that number for a moment. $72 million. I thought of the $400 in the envelope, the duffel bag, the turkey in the oven that I didn't get to eat. "Walter," I said quietly, "why are you telling me this now?" because I may not have another chance," he said simply. "And I want you to know, Gerald, this is not charity. You gave me 7 months of real companionship, real breakfast conversations and real silences and real friendship. At 80 years old, do you understand how rare that is?" I nodded. "It's worth every penny," he said, "and then some." He was discharged 2 days later. He lived, Walter Hargrove, stubborn, dignified, generous Walter, lived for another 14 months after that episode. And they were, he told me on more than one occasion, the best 14 months of his final years. Jessica at the door. Jessica came to the house in June. I had not invited her. But she found the address. Marcus was in real estate. Finding addresses was not difficult for him. And she arrived on a Saturday morning in a white SUV, wearing a dress like she was going to church, and she rang the bell. Priya let her in, brought her to the garden where Walter and I were having our morning coffee. She stopped when she saw Walter. She recovered quickly. She had her mother's composure, and she smiled and introduced herself. Walter shook her hand. He was polite. He was always polite. Then he said, "I'll leave you two to talk." And he went inside with his cane, slowly, precisely, and he didn't look back. Jessica sat across from me in the garden. She looked around at the roses, the house, the garden furniture, the quiet wealth of it all, and I watched her take it in. "Dad," she said finally. "Jessica," I said. "I'm sorry." She said it quickly, like she'd rehearsed it. "I'm sorry for how Thanksgiving went. It was wrong. We should have done things differently." I looked at her. "Differently how?" She blinked. "What? Differently how, Jessica? Given me more notice, a different amount of money, a better shelter recommendation. Dad, I want to understand what part you regret," I said. My voice was calm. I had spent months arriving at this calmness, and I wasn't going to abandon it now. "Because I don't want an apology for the way it was done. I want you to understand why it was wrong." She was quiet. Her hands twisted in her lap. "Marcus and I." She started, then stopped, started again. "Marcus said you were dependent, that you were getting too comfortable, that it wasn't sustainable." "And what did you think?" I asked. She looked down. I thought you'd be okay. I thought you were strong." "I am strong, Jessica." I said. "That's not the point. The point is that I cooked Thanksgiving dinner at 5 in the morning for a family that had already packed my bags." Her jaw tightened. I saw her eyes go bright. "I think about that every day," she whispered. "Good." I said, not cruelly, "Simply because what I want for you is not that you feel guilty. What I want for you is that you learn something from it. Because one day, maybe not for many years, but one day, you and Marcus will be old, and you will want someone to come home to. And the way you treat people now is a seed, Jessica, and seeds become what they always were." She was crying now, silently, the way she had always cried, barely, privately, like she was embarrassed by her own emotions. "Are you coming back?" she asked, "to see us, to be in our lives?" I thought about it. I genuinely thought about it. "Not yet," I said. "Not because I don't love you. I will always love you. But I think we both need to understand what we are to each other, not what we expect, what we actually are." She nodded. She wiped her eyes. She stood up. "Is he good to you?" she asked, glancing toward the house. "Walter? He is the most decent man I've met since your grandfather," I said honestly. She nodded again. She seemed to want to say something else, but she didn't. She left through the garden gate. I sat with my coffee and the roses and the morning. What Walter left behind. Walter passed away the following August. Peacefully in his own bed in his own home, with his books around him and Eleanor's photograph on the nightstand, and me in the armchair beside him, reading aloud from the Virginia history book we had never finished. He died the way he had lived, quietly, with dignity. I held his hand at the end. Neither of us spoke. There was nothing left to say that hadn't already been understood. Bernard Klein came to the house the week after the funeral. He sat across the library table from me, with a thick folder and a kind expression. and he walked me through everything. The 30%, the right of residence, the specific properties Walter had noted, including the Virginia estate that he had ultimately decided not to donate, leave it to Gerald. His notes said, he likes the trees, but there was also a letter, personal, handwritten. Bernard placed it in my hand and left the room. I unfolded it slowly. Walter's handwriting was careful, old-fashioned, the kind taught in schools that no longer exist. Gerald, it began. By the time you read this, I will have beaten you to wherever we're both going, though I'm not sure either of us was particularly rushing. I want to say some things I perhaps didn't say clearly enough. You gave me something I had not had in 31 years. You gave me the feeling of not being alone at the dinner table. That sounds like a small thing. It is not a small thing. It is, in my experience, one of the largest things there is. I know you were worried about accepting what I've left you. Stop worrying. You earned it 10 times over, not with service, but with simple human decency. In all my years of business, I learned that you can calculate the value of almost anything. Property, contracts, interest rates. But you cannot put a number on the kind of man who leaves his daughter a loving voicemail after she kicks him out on Thanksgiving morning. That is priceless, Gerald, and I have left you the nearest equivalent I could find. Take care of the roses. Take care of your heart, and if you ever see your daughter again, be kind to her, not because she deserves it yet, but because you are the kind of man who is kind anyway. That is your truest inheritance, and you came by it honestly. Your friend, Walter, the regret that comes too late, and the love that doesn't. Marcus left Jessica 16 months after Thanksgiving. He had found someone else, younger, more useful to his expanding business connections. He left her a note and took his BMW and his pressed shirts and his home office furniture. The furniture that had cost me my room, and he drove away. Jessica called me the night she found out. She called at 11:30. She was crying, not the quiet, private crying of the garden visit. Real crying, the kind that doesn't care who hears. I answered, I'm here. I said, he's gone, Dad. She said, he just left. I know, baby. I said, I'm sorry. She said again, but this time it was different. This time it wasn't prepared. This time it was broken open and raw and real. I'm so sorry about Thanksgiving. I'm so sorry I let him make me into someone I'm not. I'm so sorry I packed your bag, Dad. I think about it. I think about it all the time, and I can't. Jessica. I can't believe I did that to you. Jessica, listen to me. She quieted. I love you. I said, I have always loved you. I will always love you. Nothing that happened changes that, not because I'm a saint, but because you are Margaret's daughter, and you are my daughter, and love doesn't have a checkout time. She sobbed. But I also need you to know, I continued gently, that what happened hurt me deeply. Not the bag, not the money, the silence. The way you couldn't look at me. The turkey in the oven that nobody ate. I know. I need you to know that, not to punish you, but because the truth is what lets us heal. If I pretend it didn't happen, we build the rest of our relationship on a lie. And I am too old for lies. I know, Dad. She said quietly, I know. Come see me next week. I said, come for dinner. I'll cook. She made a sound between a laugh and a sob. You'll cook. I cook every Sunday. I said, Priya set up the kitchen, and I've been using it 4 days a week. You should taste the cornbread, Dad, Margaret's recipe. I said, still the best. She came the following Sunday. She sat at the long dining table, the one built for 10, and she looked at Walter's empty chair and Eleanor's photograph on the sideboard and Margaret's photograph on my writing desk, and she cried again, quietly, over the cornbread. I sat across from her and let her cry, and then I passed her the butter and we ate together. What I want you to remember, I am 67 years old now, 2 years past the Thanksgiving morning with the duffel bag and the $400 and the park bench where a stranger sat down and changed my life. I still live in Walter's house. My house now, I suppose, though it still feels more like his. I have kept the roses. I have kept the library, and the books, and the photograph of Eleanor on the sideboard. I have kept the bench at Riverside Commons, where Walter sat down beside me. I had a small plaque added to it. It reads, "For Walter Hargrove, who sat down when it counted." Jessica comes to dinner every Sunday now. She is rebuilding herself, slowly, carefully, the way people rebuild after storms. She is more like Margaret than she knows. She is learning to be kind again. She told me once, recently, sitting in the garden, "I keep thinking about what would have happened if Walter hadn't been there. If you had gone to that shelter, I would have been okay." I said, "How do you know?" "Because I've always been okay." I said, "I learned that from your grandfather. You learn how to carry things. And eventually, if you keep your dignity and keep loving people, something shifts." She was quiet, "But Walter changed it," she said. "Walter showed up." I said, "But the man he showed up for that was already me. I had been that man for 65 years. He just saw it when others had stopped looking." She took my hand across the garden table. "I'm looking now, Dad," she said. "I know, baby." I said, "I know." A message to everyone watching. If you are watching this, maybe you are a parent who has been set aside. Maybe you are a child who is watching this with something uncomfortable moving in your chest. Maybe you are simply a person who has been made to feel like a burden by the people who were supposed to see your value most clearly. I want to tell you something. Your dignity is not determined by who recognizes it. Your worth is not. Vote that your children, or your spouse, or your family gets to cast. The world will sometimes fail to see what you are, and you must go on being it anyway. Be the man who leaves a loving voicemail after being kicked out on Thanksgiving. Be the woman who stirs the soup at 5 in the morning because love is not canceled by ingratitude. Be the person who sits quietly on the park bench with their pain and still says, "I love you," on the way out the door. Because somewhere, maybe on a park bench, maybe in a garden, maybe in the most unexpected corner of a morning that feels like the end, someone is walking toward you who sees exactly who you are. And the life you have lived with integrity, with love, with quiet dignity, that life is never wasted. Not one day of it. Not even the Thanksgiving mornings, especially those.